The evening air in Oceanside was thick with salt and memories. Maya Collins wiped down the mahogany bar top for the third time that hour, her movements practiced and precise. At 47 years old, she'd been tending bar at the Anchor for nearly 15 years, and she knew every groove in that wood, every story etched into its surface. Thought the regulars called her Mama Maya, though she'd never had children of her own. She had a way of listening that made people feel heard, a gentle smile that could calm even the angriest drunk, and a backbone of steel hidden beneath her soft-spoken demeanor. Her hair, pulled back in a neat bun, showed streaks of silver she wore without shame. Her uniform, a simple black shirt and jeans, was always clean, always professional. Tonight was Friday, and the Anchor hummed with its usual mix of locals, sailors from the nearby base, and tourists looking for authentic military town atmosphere. Maya moved between tables with quiet efficiency, remembering orders without writing them down, offering kind words to the lonely and space to those who needed it. At the corner of the bar sat Marcus Reed, a fixture as permanent as the nautical decorations on the walls. He was somewhere in his 70s, though nobody knew exactly. His weathered brown skin spoke of decades under harsh suns, and his eyes, deep and distant, seemed to carry oceans of untold stories. He came in every Friday at exactly 6 o'clock, ordered one beer that lasted him 2 hours, and spoke to no one unless spoken to first. Maya had a special fondness for Marcus. She'd learned over the years that he was a veteran, though he never talked about his service. There was a gentleness in him, a quiet dignity that reminded her of her late father. Sometimes she'd refill his beer without charging him, and he'd nod his thanks without a word. Around 7:30, the door swung open and a group of young men strutted in, their energy filling the space like a sudden storm. They wore civilian clothes, but everything about them screamed military. The haircuts, the posture, the swagger. Maya recognized the type immediately. Navy SEALs from the base, probably just back from deployment, riding high on adrenaline and brotherhood. The leader of the group was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 30 years old, with the kind of confidence that could tip easily into arrogance. His name tag from earlier she'd caught a glimpse when he showed his eye to read Jason Mitchell. Maya approached their table with menus and her trademark warm smile, ready to welcome them as she did everyone who walked through her door. She had no idea that this ordinary Friday night was about to become anything but ordinary. Jason Mitchell and his crew settled into the large booth near the window, their voices loud and animated. Maya brought over their first round 5 beers and a bourbon and tried to ignore the way Jason's eyes swept over her with casual dismissal, the way he barely acknowledged her presence as he continued his story to his friends. "So I told the guy," Jason was saying, his voice carrying across the room, "you haven't lived until you've been downrange with a SEAL team. That's where you separate the real warriors from the weekend soldiers." His buddies laughed and clinked their bottles. Maya had heard variations of this conversation 1,000 times. Young warriors, fresh from combat, needing to prove something. She understood it, even felt compassion for what drove it. But she also knew the peacocking could turn sour fast. As the evening wore on, the group got louder. Maya kept their drinks coming and said nothing about their volume. The Anchor was a military bar, after all, and she believed these men had earned the right to blow off steam. But she noticed the way other patrons were starting to glance over, the way Marcus's shoulders had tensed slightly, though his eyes remained fixed on his beer. Around 8:30, Jason stood up, swaying slightly, and decided he wanted to play pool. The table nearest Marcus. As he racked the balls, his gaze landed on the old man sitting quietly in the corner. "Hey, old-timer," Jason called out, his tone friendly but edged with that particular condescension young men sometimes have for the elderly. "You look like you've been around. You serve?" Marcus looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. Long time ago, he said quietly, then returned his attention to his drink. Jason grinned and moved closer, leaning against the bar. Yeah? What branch? Army? Marines? Navy, Marcus replied, his voice barely above a murmur. Navy. Jason's voice rose with enthusiasm. That's what I'm talking about. What did you do? Work on a ship? Supply? Maya, pouring drinks at the other end of the bar, felt her stomach tighten. She knew that tone. She'd heard it before, the subtle mockery disguised as curiosity, the assumption that an old man sitting alone couldn't have been anything special. Marcus took a slow sip of his beer. I did my job, he said simply. Come on, man, don't be modest, Jason pressed, his friends now watching with interest. Did you see any action? Or were you one of those guys who spent the war below deck? The bar had gotten quieter. Other patrons were starting to pay attention, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Maya moved closer, instinctively protective, but unsure if she should intervene. Marcus set his beer down gently, his hand steady despite his age. His eyes, when they met Jason's, were calm but held something deeper, something that made Maya's breath catch. I saw enough, Marcus said softly. Jason laughed. Not cruelly, but with the casual arrogance of someone who thought he knew what real service looked like. I bet. Well, no disrespect, old man, but the Navy's changed a lot since your day. What we do now, it's a whole different level. Marcus nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I'm sure it is, son. And just like that, he turned back to his beer, dismissing the conversation. Jason, feeling somehow cheated of a proper audience, stared at him for a moment before returning to his game, muttering something to his friends that made them chuckle. Maya watched Marcus's face, saw the muscle working in his jaw, and wondered what storms were churning beneath that calm surface. The night deepened, and so did Jason Mitchell's need to establish his dominance. With each drink, his voice grew louder, his stories more elaborate. Maya had stopped counting how many times he'd mentioned being a SEAL, how many times he'd implied that his service was somehow more legitimate, more real than any other. What bothered Maya most wasn't the bragging itself. She'd heard plenty of that. It was the way he kept glancing over at Marcus, as if the old man's quiet dignity was somehow a challenge that needed to be conquered. Around 9:30, Jason walked back to the bar to order another round. Maya was there, polishing glasses, and she gave him her professional smile. 5 more beers? She asked. Yeah, and make it quick, sweetheart, he said, not unkindly, but with that casual dismissiveness that made Maya's smile tighten as she pulled the beers. Jason leaned against the bar, close enough to Marcus that it couldn't be accidental. You know what I think, old-timer? He said, his words slightly slurred. I think your generation, you guys had it easier. World War II, Korea, Vietnam, sure. Those were wars, but they weren't like what we're doing now. Counterterrorism, surgical strikes, operating in complete secrecy. We're the tip of the spear, man. The real deal. Marcus didn't respond, didn't even look up. His weathered hands remained steady on his beer glass, his expression unchanged. That silence seemed to irritate Jason more than any argument would have. I'm serious, Jason continued, louder now. I respect your service and all, but you have no idea what it's like to be a Navy SEAL in the 21st century. The training alone would break most men from your era. Hell, it breaks most men from our era. One of Jason's buddies called out. Jay, leave the old guy alone. Man, but Jason was on a roll now, feeding off the attention, the alcohol lowering his inhibitions. I'm just saying there's serving, and then there's serving, you know? There's regular military, and then there's special operations. It's just different levels. Maya set the beers down harder than necessary. Jason, she said quietly, using his name deliberately. That's enough. Marcus here is a customer and a regular, and he came here for a quiet drink. How about you take these back to your table? Jason looked at her, surprised by the steel in her gentle voice. For a moment, something like shame flickered across his face. I'm not trying to disrespect anybody, he said defensively. I'm just having a conversation. It's a conversation nobody asked for, Maya replied, her tone still soft but firm. These beers are on me. Go sit down. Jason stared at her for a long moment, and Maya could see the wheels turning, the urge to argue warring with his training, and whatever basic decency he still had access to through the alcohol. Finally, he grabbed the beers and headed back to his table, but not before throwing one more look at Marcus. Probably just worked in the motor pool or something, he muttered. Just loud enough for Maya and a few nearby patrons to hear. Maya turned to Marcus, ready to apologize on behalf of the younger man, but the words died in her throat. Marcus's face was still calm, but his eyes, those deep, ocean-dark eyes, held something that made her shiver. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. Something ancient and patient and absolutely certain. You okay? She asked softly. Marcus looked at her, and the intensity faded, replaced by the gentle warmth she was used to. I'm fine, Maya. Thank you for the kindness, but some lessons have to be learned the hard way. What do you mean? But Marcus just shook his head and returned to his beer, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Maya felt a strange anticipation building in her chest, like the static electricity before a lightning strike. Across the room, Jason was holding court again, his voice carrying clearly. I mean, somebody should tell these old guys that their time is over. We're the ones carrying the legacy now. Maya glanced at Marcus one more time and saw that small smile grow just a fraction wider. At 10:15. One of Jason's friends, a younger SEAL named Chris, who'd been mostly quiet all evening, stood up and walked to the bar. Unlike his companions, Chris moved with a humble confidence, and when he caught Maya's eye, he smiled apologetically. Can I get a water? He asked. And I'm sorry about my buddy. He's a good guy. Just sometimes the beer does the talking. Maya appreciated the apology as she filled a glass. It happens, she said. You boys have a hard job. I understand needing to unwind. Chris nodded, then glanced over at Marcus. That gentleman over there, has he really never said what he did in the Navy? Never, Maya replied. And I've never asked. Figure a man's service is his own business unless he wants to share it. Chris was quiet for a moment, studying Marcus with a different kind of interest than Jason had shown. My grandfather was Navy, he said softly. Vietnam era. He never talked about it much either. The ones who actually saw the worst of it usually don't. Something in the young man's tone made Maya look at him more closely. There was a respect there, a recognition of something his louder friend was missing entirely. Chris took his water and walked over to Marcus. Excuse me, sir, he said, and this time his voice held genuine deference. I don't mean to bother you, but I wanted to say thank you for your service. Marcus looked up, his expression softening. You're welcome, son. And thank you for yours. Can I ask you something? Chris said. Not trying to bother you, just genuinely curious. What was your rate? Your specialty? Before Marcus could answer, Jason appeared at Chris's shoulder, drawn by the conversation. Oh, here we go, he said, his words thick with beer and bravado. Let me guess, cook, yeoman? Maybe you swept decks? Jason, shut up, Chris said sharply, but the damage was building. Several other patrons had turned to watch now. The bartender from the Anchor's sister establishment down the street had just walked in for his shift change and stopped. Sensing the tension, Jason, interpreting the attention as encouragement, pressed on. I'm just saying, if this guy had actually done anything worth mentioning, he'd mention it. Real operators, we're proud of what we do. We don't sit in corners hiding from our own service record. The bar had gone almost completely silent now. Even the jukebox seemed to have quieted between songs, leaving Jason's words hanging in the air like smoke. Marcus set down his beer with deliberate care. He turned on his stool to face Jason directly for the first time all evening. The movement was unhurried, but there was something in it that made Maya's heart start to race. "You want to know what I did?" Marcus asked, his voice still quiet, but now carrying to every corner of the room. Jason crossed his arms, a smug smile on his face. "Yeah, old man, I do." "What was your rate? What was your specialty? Better yet," he turned to his friends with a grin, "what was your call sign?" Every real operator has a call sign. The question hung in the air. Maya found herself holding her breath. The entire bar seemed to lean in, waiting. Marcus looked at Jason for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he spoke two words so quietly that people shrinked to hear them. "The Reaper." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Jason, drunk as he was, felt the weight of those words. They landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of recognition through every military person present. Chris's face had gone pale. His water glass was frozen halfway to his mouth. One of the older patrons at the back, a retired Marine, slowly stood up from his seat, his expression one of shocked reverence. Jason, not quite understanding but feeling the shift, laughed nervously. "The Reaper? Come on, oh my God," Chris whispered, his voice barely audible. He was staring at Marcus with wide eyes, his earlier casual respect transformed into something approaching awe. "Oh my God, you're him. You're actually him." Jason looked between Chris and Marcus, his bravado wavering. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, but his voice had lost its edge. Around the bar, phones were coming out, fingers flying across screens. Searching. Chris couldn't seem to tear his eyes away from Marcus. "The Reaper," he repeated, and now his voice was shaking. "Sir, we learned about you in training. They told us we thought you were a myth, a legend they used to motivate us." The retired Marine who'd stood up was walking toward them now, moving slowly, reverently, as if approaching something holy. "Marcus Reed," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Vietnam, MSCV SOG. You ran Black Ops in Laos and Cambodia. Classified missions that officially never happened." Maya felt the hair on her arms stand up. She'd served Marcus beer every Friday for 5 years. 5 years of quiet conversation, gentle smiles, and never once had he mentioned, "You have over 200 confirmed kills." The Marine continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You spent 3 years behind enemy lines. You survived injuries that should have killed you twice. You saved 17 American POs. And when you finally came home, they couldn't even give you the medals you deserved because the missions were classified." Marcus said nothing, his face impassive, but Maya saw his hands tighten slightly around his beer glass. All around the bar, people were reading the search results on their phones, their faces registering shock, disbelief, and dawning understanding. One woman, a young sailor who couldn't have been more than 25, had tears running down her cheeks as she read. Jason's face had gone from red to white. He stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as Chris pulled up an article on his phone and shoved it in front of him. Marcus Reed, the Reaper, legendary MACV SOG operator. Chris read aloud, his voice barely steady. Considered by military historians to be one of the most effective and lethal special operations soldiers in American history. His tactics are still studied in advanced SEAL training. His call sign, the Reaper, was given to him by enemy forces who believed he was a ghost, a demon who could not be killed and left no survivors. The young SEAL's hands were shaking as he lowered his phone. "Sir," he said to Marcus, and now there was no mistaking the reverence in his voice. "You're the reason I became a SEAL. Your story, what little we were allowed to know of it, it's What got me through Hell Week? Every time I wanted to quit, I thought about you, about what you endured, what you survived. Jason was reading his own phone now, scrolling through article after article, his face growing paler with each swipe. Maya could see the exact moment when the full weight of his earlier words hit him, the condescension, the mockery, the casual dismissal of a man who had literally written the book on special operations. "I didn't know," Jason said, his voice small and hollow. "I didn't. You didn't ask," Marcus said quietly. "You assumed." He took a slow sip of his beer, completely calm, as if the bar hadn't just discovered his identity. "You saw an old man sitting alone and decided you knew his whole story. Decided his service couldn't possibly measure up to yours." The words, delivered without anger or accusation, hit harder than any shout could have. Jason looked like he might be sick. The retired Marine reached Marcus and did something Maya had never seen in her 15 years at the anchor. He came to attention and saluted, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Sir," he said, his voice choked. "It's an honor." Marcus stood slowly, his old bones creaking, and returned the salute with the precision of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. "At ease, Marine," he said gently. "And thank you." Around the bar, others were standing, now veterans, active duty, even some civilians who understood they were in the presence of living history. Maya's own eyes were burning with tears. She didn't fully understand. Jason stood apart from it all, watching the man he'd mocked being honored, realizing too late that he'd been in the presence of greatness and had tried to diminish it. Marcus caught his eye across the room and held his gaze, and in that moment, Jason saw exactly what he'd been too blind and too arrogant to see before. The weight of real experience, real sacrifice, real courage that didn't need to announce itself to be known. Jason Mitchell stood rooted to the spot as person after person approached Marcus Reed, some to shake his hand, others just to stand nearby, as if proximity to such a legend might bestow some measure of his strength. The young SEAL's face was a canvas of emotions, shame, disbelief, and a dawning horror at his own behavior. Maya watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride for Marcus and deep sympathy for the younger man. She'd seen enough of life to know that sometimes the universe delivered its lessons with brutal precision. But she also knew that how a person responded to those lessons defined their character. Chris, the quieter SEAL, stood beside Marcus with his phone out, showing him an article about Operation Cedar Falls, one of the classified missions Marcus had participated in that had only been declassified 3 years ago. "Sir, my instructor at Bades told us about this," Chris said, his voice still shaking. "He said 3 men went into a compound holding 11 enemy officers. He said those 3 men completed the mission against impossible odds. He never told us you were one of them." Marcus nodded slowly. "We did our job," he said simply. "Same as you boys do now." "It's not the same," Chris said quietly. "What you did, the equipment you had, the support that didn't exist back then, sir, with all respect, what we do is hard. What you did was—" He trailed off, unable to find words adequate to the reality. The retired Marine, whose name tag identified him as Robert Hayes, had pulled up a chair beside Marcus. "I was in Keesan in '68, he said, his voice rough with memory. "We heard stories about CVSOG operators, about ghosts in the jungle. We didn't believe them. Thought they were just campfire tales to keep our spirits up. They were real," Marcus said softly. "We were real, and we were just as scared as everyone else. Bob, don't let anyone tell you different." Maya moved through the gathering crowd, refreshing drinks, but she kept her attention on Jason. The young SEAL hadn't moved from his spot near the pool table. His friends had migrated toward Marcus, drawn by the gravity of genuine heroism. But Jason stood alone with his phone in his hand, reading article after article about the man he dismissed as probably just a motor pool guy. She walked over to him, carrying a glass of water. "Here," she said gently. Jason looked up at her, and she saw that his eyes were red-rimmed. "I told him his generation had it easier," he said, his voice breaking. "I told one of the most decorated operators in American history that he didn't know what real service looked like." "You didn't know," Maya said. And while her words were kind, they weren't quite forgiveness. "That would have to be earned." "I should have known," Jason shot back, some heat entering his voice, but it was directed at himself now. "I should have had enough respect, enough humility to not assume. Chris tried to tell me to back off. You told me to back off. But I was so sure of myself, so convinced that being a SEL made me special, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me." Maya nodded slowly. "So what are you going to do about it?" Jason looked at her, then across the room at Marcus, who was surrounded by respectful admirers, but looked vaguely uncomfortable with all the attention. "I don't know," Jason admitted. "An apology seems inadequate." "Probably is," Maya agreed. "But it's a start. And it's what a real warrior would do: own his mistakes, learn from them, grow." She left him there and returned to the bar, where she found Chris ordering a round of drinks. "These are for Marcus," he said, pulling out his wallet. "Whatever he wants for the rest of the year. I want to set up a tab." "Already done," said a voice behind him. Robert Hayes was standing there, his own wallet out. "But I'll match it. Call it an honor." Within minutes, 3 more veterans had added to Marcus's tab, and Maya had stopped accepting the money because her own eyes were too blurred with tears to see the bills clearly. The anchor, on this ordinary Friday night, had become something sacred, a temple where true sacrifice was finally being recognized, where a humble man's dignity was being restored by those who understood its value. Marcus, through it all, remained seated at his spot at the corner of the bar, looking slightly overwhelmed, but accepting the recognition with the same quiet grace he'd shown when accepting Jason's mockery. He hadn't sought this attention. He hadn't needed validation. But now that it had come, he bore it with the same steady strength that had earned him his legendary status. And across the room, Jason Mitchell finally found the courage to move his feet. The crowd around Marcus had thinned slightly as the initial shock gave way to respectful distance. People understood instinctively that a man like Marcus Reed valued his space, his quiet dignity. They'd paid their respects, shaken his hand, thanked him for his service, and now they gave him room to breathe. That's when Jason approached. Maya watched from behind the bar, her heart in her throat. She'd seen a lot in 15 years, fights, reconciliations, moments of grace and moments of ugliness, but she sensed this moment carried a weight that went beyond this bar. This night, these 2 men. Jason stopped a respectful distance away, his hands hanging at his sides, his posture no longer cocky, but genuinely humble. "Sir," he said, and his voice was steady despite the emotion in it. "May I speak with you?" Marcus looked up, his dark eyes measuring. For a long moment, he said nothing, and the silence stretched taut as a wire. Then he gestured to the empty stool beside him. "Sit down, son." Jason sat, and Maya noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. Around the bar, conversations had quieted. Everyone was pretending not to watch, but everyone was watching. "Sir, Jason started, then stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily. "There's no excuse for how I acted tonight. I was disrespectful, arrogant, and blind. I saw an older man sitting alone, and I made assumptions based on my own inflated sense of importance. I mocked your service, dismissed your experience, and tried to diminish what you did, all without knowing a single thing about you." Marcus listened without interruption, his face unreadable. "I became an SEAL because I wanted to be part of something greater than myself. Jason continued, his voice gaining strength even as emotion thickened it. I wanted to serve, to protect, to be part of that brotherhood of warriors who stand on the wall. But tonight I failed at the most basic principle of that brotherhood: respect for those who came before us. Respect for the men who paved the roads we walk on. He took a shaky breath. Sir, I just read about Operation Thundercloud. 3 men, 48 hours, deep behind enemy lines with no support and no extraction plan. You and 2 others took out a command post, destroyed their communications, and made it back through 50 miles of hostile territory. The article said it was considered a suicide mission. They said the enemy commander himself put a bounty on the Reaper's head wanted you captured alive, because he couldn't believe one man could do that much damage. Marcus's expression softened slightly. Just a fraction. It was my team, he said quietly. Never just one man. My brothers did their part, same as me. Your team didn't make it back, Jason said, and now his voice broke completely. The article said you carried one of them 12 miles after he was hit. Carried him through enemy patrols, through rivers, through terrain that shouldn't have been survivable. You got him to an extraction point, called him a hello, and put him on board. He lived. Because of you. Tears were running freely down Jason's face now, and he made no attempt to hide them. And I called you old-timer. I suggested you probably just swept decks. I was so busy being proud of my own accomplishments that I couldn't see real greatness sitting 3 feet away from me. He stood up, came to attention, and saluted with perfect precision. Sir, I am deeply, profoundly sorry. There is no excuse for my behavior, and no apology adequate to the disrespect I showed you. I am ashamed of myself, and I promise you on my honor as a SEAL that I will carry this lesson for the rest of my life. I will never again assume that I know someone's story. I will never again let arrogance blind me to the sacrifice of those who served before me. The bar was completely silent now. Even the kitchen had gone quiet. Maya had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her own face. Marcus looked at the young SEAL standing before him. Ramrod straight, holding his salute, his face wet with tears, but his eyes clear and honest. Then slowly Marcus stood. His old bones protested, but he straightened to his full height, which, Maya realized, was considerable even now, and returned the salute. At ease, Jason, Marcus said, his voice gentle. Sit back down. Jason sat, and Marcus sat beside him. Then Marcus did something that stunned everyone watching. He put his weathered hand on Jason's shoulder. You want to know the truth? Marcus said softly. Every single one of us who made it back from that war came home carrying ghosts. We came back to a country that didn't want to hear our stories, didn't want to acknowledge what we'd done or what we'd sacrificed. For decades, I sat in this corner, drinking my beer, listening to young warriors like you talk about your service. And I never once felt the need to prove myself to you. He squeezed Jason's shoulder. You made a mistake tonight, son. A big one. But you owned it. You stood up, you apologized, and you meant it. That takes courage, maybe not the same courage as going downrange, but courage nonetheless. Marcus Reed kept his hand on Jason Mitchell's shoulder, and in that gesture, the entire bar witnessed something profound. The passing of wisdom from one warrior to another, from one generation to the next. When I was your age, Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed room, I thought I was invincible. I'd survived things that killed better men. I had a reputation that preceded me. And I looked at the older veterans, the World War II guys, the Korea vets, and I thought, maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep down, that what we were doing in Vietnam was harder, more real, more important. He paused, a sad smile crossing his weathered face. I was wrong. It took me decades to understand, that every generation of warriors believes their war is the defining war. Their sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice. The truth is, son, every man or woman who puts on the uniform and stands in harm's way deserves respect. From the Revolutionary War to today, from the most decorated hero to the cook who keeps the troops fed, they all served. They all sacrificed. They all have stories that matter. Jason nodded, unable to speak. The measure of a warrior isn't just in what you do in combat, Marcus said. It's in how you treat your brothers and sisters, in how you honor those who came before you, and in what you teach those who come after. You failed that test tonight, but failure isn't the end. It's the beginning of wisdom, if you're brave enough to learn from it. Marcus stood slowly, and Jason rose with him. The old man extended his hand, and the young Sal took it, gripping firmly as tears continued to stream down his face. "You're a good man, Jason Mitchell," Marcus said. "I can see that. You've got the courage to admit when you're wrong, and that's rarer than you might think. Take what happened here tonight. Carry it with you. Let it make you better. That's all any of us can do with our mistakes." Jason's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Sir, if you'd be willing, I'd be honored if you'd let me buy you dinner sometime. Let me hear your stories, learn from your experience. Not because you're a legend, but because you're a brother in arms, and I have so much to learn." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'd like that, but only if you promise to tell me your stories too. What you boys are doing now, the threats you face, the challenges of modern warfare, that interests me. Every generation has something to teach the others. If we're willing to listen..." "Deal," Jason said. And finally, he smiled a real smile. Humble and genuine. Chris approached then, followed by the rest of their group. "Sir," Chris said to Marcus, "if the invitation extends to all of us, we'd be honored to join. Maybe you could visit the base sometime, talk to the younger guys in training. Help us remember what this is really about." Marcus looked around at these young faces, these warriors who represented the next generation of defenders, and Maya saw something shift in his expression. For years, he'd sat alone with his memories, his ghosts, his quiet dignity. But perhaps, she thought, perhaps he'd been waiting for this, for someone to ask, for someone to care, for a chance to pass on what he'd learned at such terrible cost. "I think I'd like that," Marcus said softly. The bar erupted in applause, not loud or raucous, but steady and heartfelt. Maya found herself clapping along, tears still streaming down her face, as she witnessed something beautiful: reconciliation, growth, and the timeless connection between warriors separated by decades, but united by service. As the evening wound down, as Marcus finally prepared to head home, Jason walked him to the door. The entire bar watched as the young SEAL helped the older man with his jacket, a gesture of respect and care that spoke volumes. At the door, Jason said something quietly, and Marcus responded with words that no one else could hear. Then Jason saluted one more time, and Marcus returned it with that same perfect precision. After Marcus left, Jason returned to his table where his friends waited. His earlier swagger was gone, replaced by something deeper, more substantial. "I was so wrong," he said quietly. "About everything. About what makes someone important. About what real strength looks like. About what it means to be a warrior." "We all were," Chris agreed. "But now we know better. Now we do better." Maya collected glasses from their table, and Jason looked up at her. "Thank you," he said, "for trying to warn me, for protecting him, for being the kind of person who sees people for who they really are." Maya smiled, her heart full. "That's my job, honey. Taking care of people. All people. Because you never know who's sitting at your bar. Could be a janitor, could be a CEO, could be a legend. Either way, they deserve kindness." As the night ended and the bar emptied, Maya stood alone in the quiet space, thinking about the extraordinary events she'd witnessed. She thought about Marcus Reed, who'd carried his dignity and his memories with such quiet strength for so many years. She thought about Jason Mitchell, who'd had the courage to face his own arrogance and grow from it. She thought about all the veterans who'd gathered tonight, united by service and sacrifice and mutual respect. And she thought about the lesson that would ripple out from this night through Jason and his team, through the other patrons who'd witnessed it, through the stories that would be told and retold. The lesson that humility is strength, that assumptions are dangerous, that every person carries stories we cannot see, and that respect costs nothing but means everything. The next Friday, at exactly 6 o'clock, Marcus Reed walked through the door of the Anchor. But he wasn't alone. Jason Mitchell and Chris walked with him, and behind them, a handful of other young SEALs, all looking at the old man with reverence and genuine eagerness to learn. Maya smiled as she reached for the beer tap. The Anchor had always been a place where stories lived, where warriors found refuge, where the past and present met over drinks and honest conversation. But tonight, and every Friday night that followed, it became something more, a classroom, a bridge between generations, a living testament to the truth that real strength lies not in never falling, but in how we rise after we fall. And as Marcus settled into his usual spot, now surrounded by young men hungry to learn from his wisdom, Maya wiped down the bar and felt grateful to be witness to it all, because she understood, perhaps better than anyone, that what she'd seen wasn't just one man's humbling or another man's vindication. It was a reminder of what matters most: honor, respect, humility, and a willingness to see past the surface to the depths of human experience that connect us all. The Reaper had spoken, and the bar had listened, and in listening, they'd all been changed. Asterisk, asterisk, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Unbroken Grace Stories community. Where are you watching from?